My name is Cassandra Turner. I'm 32 years old, and the morning my grandmother's will was supposed to be read, my own mother planted herself in front of the conference room door and told me I wasn't allowed inside. "Wait in the hall," she said, keeping one hand on the handle. "This is family business." I actually laughed because I thought I had heard her wrong. For 20 years, I had cooked for family gatherings, cleaned up after everyone left, carried boxes, handled errands, and stood outside more family photographs than I could count while my brother occupied the center. Now, apparently, I wasn't family enough to hear my grandmother's final wishes. My father stared at the carpet. My brother didn't even look embarrassed. He simply adjusted his jacket as if the meeting had already been decided in his favor. I said, "Fine." Because there are moments when arguing only gives people the satisfaction of watching you beg. I turned toward the elevator. That was when the attorney looked up from the documents spread across the conference table. "No," he said. Everyone stopped. He pointed toward the empty chair across from him. "She stays." My mother's hand dropped from the door. My brother looked confused. My father suddenly looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Then the attorney removed a sealed envelope from a separate folder and said my grandmother had instructed him not to open it unless every person named in that room was present. He broke the seal, unfolded 3 pages, and read the first sentence. My brother stopped smiling. My mother slowly turned toward my father, and Dad's face went white. Whatever they had expected to inherit that morning, my grandmother had apparently left something else behind first. Proof. Before I tell you what that letter revealed, and what happened after my family realized I wasn't leaving, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I want to see just how far this story travels. My grandmother was Evelyn Turner, and she had spent 38 years building Turner Exhibition Works, a Kansas City company that designed and fabricated custom displays for trade shows, museums, and corporate events. It wasn't glamorous work. There were steel frames, laminate dust, shipping deadlines, damaged crates, invoices, overtime sheets, and frantic clients calling at 6 in the morning because an exhibit had to be in Chicago by noon the next day. Grandma loved every part of it. She started with 4 employees in a rented warehouse and turned it into a company employing nearly 70 people. My mother, Diane Turner, eventually became chief financial officer. My father, Robert Turner, served as controller. My brother, Ryan Turner, became vice president of sales before he was 30. I took a completely different path. I worked as a quality control scheduler at a railcar component plant, where my days revolved around inspection windows, serial numbers, production delays, and making sure nobody signed off on something that hadn't actually passed review. Mom considered that embarrassingly ordinary. Ryan liked calling me the spreadsheet sister. Grandma never did. She used to say that people who notice small inconsistencies are the reason large organizations survive. About 18 months before she died, she began asking me to visit her on Sunday afternoons. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes she handed me stacks of company paperwork and asked questions that seemed random. "Does this vendor number look duplicated? Why would freight charges increase when shipments went down? Would the same invoice ever be approved twice?" I assumed she wanted help understanding a new accounting system. Looking back, she was testing whether I saw what she saw. At the memorial luncheon, Ryan arrived 20 minutes late and was still treated like the guest of honor. Mom moved a reserved chair beside Dad so Ryan could sit between them, then pointed me toward the far end of the table and said, "Cass, you won't mind squeezing in there." Ryan spent lunch telling relatives that Grandma had been preparing him for greater responsibility. Mom corrected him with a smile. Not greater responsibility. Leadership. Then she raised her glass and praised him for landing the company's biggest regional account. Nobody mentioned that the contract had barely broken, even because Ryan had promised rush production at a discount the fabrication team couldn't sustain. I knew because Grandma had shown me the numbers. When an aunt asked what I did for work, Ryan grinned and said, "She makes sure bolts get inspected or something." Several people laughed politely. I looked directly at him. "And what exactly do you make sure happens?" His smile tightened. Mom immediately changed the subject. That was the first moment I realized something had shifted. Normally, I would have swallowed the insult. This time, I didn't. Later, as people were leaving, I heard Mom whisper to Dad near the coat rack, Tomorrow has to stay controlled. Dad replied. Evelyn made her instructions clear. Mom snapped. Evelyn isn't here. They stopped talking when they saw me. The next morning, I understood what controlled meant. Mom had decided the easiest way to manage Grandma's final wishes was to manage who heard them. And when the attorney, Ethan Caldwell, overruled her at that conference room door, I watched 20 years of family hierarchy crack in less than 10 seconds. Have you ever noticed how quickly people reveal what they're afraid of losing when somebody finally tells them no? Ethan Caldwell waited until I sat down before beginning. Only then did I learn that my presence wasn't optional. Evelyn's written instructions stated that the substantive provisions of her estate could not be discussed unless Diane, Robert, Ryan, and Cassandra Turner were physically present or had formally waived attendance. Mom interrupted immediately. That's ridiculous. Cassandra isn't involved with the company. Ethan looked at her over his glasses. Mrs. Turner, your mother anticipated that objection. Ryan gave a short laugh. Of course she did. Ethan ignored him and opened the sealed letter. Grandma's first paragraph wasn't sentimental. It said, if Cassandra is sitting in this room only because Ethan insisted, then Diane has confirmed one of the reasons I wrote this. Nobody moved. I almost forgot to breathe. Ethan continued. Grandma wrote that for years she had watched Mom decide who counted. Ryan accept privileges he hadn't earned, and Dad maintain peace by refusing to challenge either of them. Then the letter became specific. She listed 6 company events with dates, a warehouse expansion proposal she had rejected, but that Mom later approved under a different project code, a marketing contract awarded to Northline Creative Logistics despite the company having no competitive bids, 3 unusually large client development reimbursements submitted by Ryan, a consulting payment authorized after Grandma had expressly frozen outside consulting, and 11 approvals carrying Dad's electronic authorization. Ryan sat forward. What is this? Ethan kept reading. Grandma explained that 8 months earlier she had hired an independent forensic accounting firm without telling the family. My mother's face changed instantly. Not sadness, not confusion, calculation. She asked, what firm? Ethan said, that information is in the supporting documents. Mom turned to Dad. You knew about this? Dad shook his head too quickly. Ryan said, this is insane. Grandma was sick. Ethan stopped reading. Mr. Turner, I advise you not to characterize the testator's capacity unless you intend to formally challenge it. Her estate documents include 2 independent competency evaluations completed at execution. Ryan leaned back. He had nothing to say to that. The letter continued. Northline Creative Logistics, the vendor Ryan had repeatedly championed, was controlled through an LLC whose registered manager was his former college roommate. Over 22 months, Turner Exhibition Works had paid Northline $286,400. Grandma's auditors had been unable to verify approximately $173,000 worth of deliverables. Ryan exploded. That doesn't mean I took anything. Nobody said you did, I replied. Not yet. He turned toward me with the same expression he used when we were teenagers, and I had ruined a joke by refusing to laugh. You think you understand our company because Grandma showed you a few spreadsheets? That was when I finally understood why she had shown them to me. She wasn't teaching me about the company. She was making sure somebody outside their chain of command knew the numbers looked wrong. Ethan turned to the second page. Grandma wrote that she had confronted Mom 6 months earlier. Mom claimed the expenses were aggressive business development and said Grandma was too removed from modern operations to understand. Grandma then requested every supporting invoice. According to the letter, Mom provided only partial records and urged her to trust the family. Grandma's response was one sentence. Trust is not an accounting control. I almost smiled because I could hear her saying it. Dad pressed both palms against the table. Ethan read that when Grandma asked him why his authorization appeared on 11 questionable approvals, Dad said Diane had sometimes processed transactions using his credentials when he was unavailable. Dad whispered, "That's true." Mom whipped around. "Robert." He looked at her. "It is." Ryan said, "Can everybody stop acting like this is some courtroom? We're talking about Grandma's money." Ethan corrected him. "We're talking about corporate funds and an estate with controlling ownership interests in that corporation." That shut him up. Then came the provision none of them expected. Grandma owned 62% of Turner Exhibition Works through Turner Holdings. She had not divided those shares equally. She placed 51% of the voting interest into a new controlling trust. The initial trustee and voting representative was me, Cassandra Turner. Mom made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. Ryan shot out of his chair. "She doesn't even work there," Ethan calmly said. "Sit down." Ryan didn't. "This is a joke." I looked up at him. "Funny. 5 minutes ago, I wasn't important enough to enter the room." He glared at me. Ethan continued. "I did not automatically own the company, nor could I simply liquidate it for personal gain. Grandma had designed something smarter. I would hold voting authority during a 12-month review period, while an independent board examined the questioned transactions. Mom and Ryan's beneficial inheritance interests were temporarily frozen. Dad's distribution was also restricted pending verification of his approvals. Their money had not disappeared. Their control had. And for the first time that morning, I realized revenge did not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it arrived in 3 notarized pages and asked everyone to take their seats. Mom recovered first. She always did. Within seconds, she changed from shocked daughter to CFO. "Ethan, I want copies of every document, every audit engagement letter, every communication with the accountants, and every medical record related to Evelyn's competency." Ethan nodded. "You are entitled to documents relevant to the estate. Your counsel may request them." "My counsel?" she repeated. "You're already assuming litigation?" "No," he said. "You are." Ryan pointed at me. "And she gets to control our company while this circus happens?" Ethan answered, "The trust controls the voting block. Cassandra exercises that authority subject to fiduciary duties and oversight." Mom looked at me for the first time without the usual mixture of impatience and dismissal. Now she was assessing risk. "Cassie, you don't want this." I said nothing. "You have your own job. You don't understand our clients, our contracts, our employees. Your grandmother was upset. She created a mess, and we can fix it privately." There was the word, privately. The word people use when truth becomes inconvenient. "You tried to leave me in the hallway 10 minutes ago," I said. "Why would I trust you to fix anything privately?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I'm your mother." That didn't make me family at the door. Dad closed his eyes. Ryan muttered, "Oh, here we go." I turned to him. "No, Ryan. Here you go. You've spent years telling everyone you earned your position. Now an independent review gets to find out." He slapped his palm against the table. "I brought in millions in sales. Then the record should make you look great." He went quiet again. Ethan explained the rest of Grandma's instructions. Within 10 business days, Turner Exhibition Works had to convene a special governance meeting chaired by an independent corporate attorney. The forensic accounting firm would present its preliminary findings. Mom and Dad would retain their jobs temporarily but lose unilateral authority over payments above $10,000. Ryan could continue handling existing accounts, but could not authorize new vendors, discretionary marketing contracts, or expense reimbursements beyond a fixed threshold. Any person found to have knowingly diverted company funds would have to reimburse verified losses before receiving the unrestricted portion of Grandma's estate. If repayment was refused, the equivalent amount would be deducted from that beneficiary's share and transferred back to the company. Grandma had not ordered us to sit in a circle and discuss our feelings. She had ordered documentation. Ryan called it humiliation. Mom called it manipulation from beyond the grave. Dad said almost nothing. I asked Ethan one question. Did Grandma know Mom might try to keep me outside? Ethan looked at Mom before answering. Your grandmother amended the attendance clause 3 weeks after her last private meeting with your mother. That was answer enough. Mom stood. We're leaving. Ethan replied. You may leave. The reading will continue. She hesitated. Her entire life had trained her to control rooms by exiting them or threatening to. For once, the room did not follow. She sat back down. Ethan handed each of us a copy of Grandma's letter. Mine had a small handwritten note beneath the signature. Cass, do not use this authority to punish them. Use it to make it impossible for anyone to hide. That sentence mattered because I was angry enough to want punishment. Grandma knew that too. She wasn't asking me to be gentle. She was asking me to be accurate. The difference became crucial 2 days later when Mom arrived at my apartment without calling. She walked in holding a folder and spoke as though the will reading had been a temporary misunderstanding. I have a solution. Inside was a proposed agreement. I would resign as trust representative. In return, Mom and Dad would personally pay me $150,000 after probate closed, and Ryan would guarantee me a non-voting 2% interest in the company. I stared at the papers. You're offering to buy Grandma's decision from me. Mom lowered her voice. I'm trying to protect 70 employees from chaos. Then why is the payment coming from you instead of the company? She paused. Because this is family. I laughed. Interesting how quickly I became family after Ethan told me I had the votes. Her expression hardened. Don't get arrogant. Evelyn gave you temporary authority, not competence. That one landed differently than she expected. Years earlier, I would have tried to prove myself. Now I simply slid the agreement back across the table. Then you should have nothing to fear from the review. She picked up the folder. At the door, she said, Ryan has relationships you don't understand. If his reputation is damaged, the business suffers. Maybe his reputation should depend on what he actually did. She stared at me for several seconds. You've changed. No. You're finally dealing with the version of me who can say no. No. The following morning, Ryan called 3 times. I let every call go to voicemail. By lunch, one of Grandma's auditors contacted me and asked whether I had received any requests to destroy, revise, or remove company records. That question told me something much bigger was coming. The special governance meeting happened 9 days later in the company's training room, not Grandma's house, and that mattered. Nobody could hide behind family photographs or childhood memories. We sat beneath fluorescent lights with a projector showing transaction numbers, invoice dates, approval chains, and bank records. Ethan attended as a state counsel. The trust had separate counsel, Melissa Grant. The accounting team sent 2 forensic accountants. 3 independent board members joined us, along with Mom, Dad, Ryan, and me. Mom came prepared with her own attorney. Ryan came prepared with attitude. He leaned toward me before the meeting started and whispered, "Enjoy your little power trip." I whispered back, "Enjoy the audit." The lead accountant began with Northline. Their investigation found that the vendor had billed Turner Exhibition Works for campaign strategy, lead generation, event coordination, and market development consulting. Of 47 invoices, 19 contained descriptions copied almost word for word from earlier invoices. Several claimed travel on dates when company records showed no related event. One billed $18,600 for a client reception in Denver. The named client confirmed that no reception had occurred. Ryan interrupted. Northline handled confidential prospecting. Clients don't always know what gets done behind the scenes. The accountant clicked to the next slide. Northline's bank records, obtained through proper legal process after Grandma's initial review escalated, showed payments from the company followed by transfers to another entity called RGT Ventures. Ryan froze. RGT matched his initials. The entity's mailing address was a private mailbox 20 minutes from his home. His attorney immediately told him not to answer questions. Mom looked genuinely surprised. That was the first sign that whatever she had done, she hadn't known everything Ryan had done. The accountants had traced $74,000 into RGT accounts. They were still determining whether all of it represented improper benefit, because some payments could potentially have legitimate business explanations. Grandma had been careful not to accuse without proof, and so were they. Ryan was not careful. You dug into my personal accounts because she told you to? Melissa replied. The company's counsel followed applicable legal procedures after evidence of related party transactions emerged. Nobody is asking you to speculate. The board will deal with substantiated findings. Ryan turned to Mom. Say something. She didn't. Then the presentation moved to Mom's decisions. The auditors found that Diane had approved Northline despite receiving an internal procurement warning that the vendor lacked adequate documentation. She had also overridden a competitive bid requirement 5 times. More damaging, after Grandma began asking questions, Mom reassigned the accounts payable supervisor who had raised concerns. Mom's lawyer argued that all those actions fell within executive discretion. The accountants agreed that some could. Then they displayed an email. Mom had written to Ryan. Your grandmother is looking too closely at Northline. Clean up the descriptions and stop routing everything through the same project code. Nobody spoke. Mom stared at the screen. I felt something cold settle inside me. For years, she had called me oversensitive when I noticed patterns. Now, a room full of professionals was staring at one of hers. Dad was next. His credentials had approved 11 transactions, but system logs showed 8 had originated from Mom's workstation while he was either traveling or logged out. 3, however, came from Dad's workstation. He admitted he had approved them without reviewing the supporting documents because Mom told him they were urgent. Melissa asked, "Did you understand that your authorization represented financial review?" Dad said, "Yes." "Did you conduct that review?" "No." That was the moment his face looked exactly as it had during the will reading. Not because he had stolen money, but because passivity had finally produced a number beside it. When the accountants finished, Ryan stood up. "So what? You're going to destroy the company because Grandma had a grudge?" I said, "Grandma didn't create those bank transfers." "You've wanted this your whole life," he snapped. "You were always jealous." I almost laughed. "Ryan, I wanted a seat at Thanksgiving. You apparently wanted a shell company." His attorney told him to stop speaking. Even one board member looked down to hide a reaction. Ryan pointed at me. "You think you're better than me because you schedule inspections at some factory?" There it was again. The old weapon. Make my work small. Make me small. And maybe the facts shrink with me. I stood. "No, I think I'm better at one thing that matters today. When a number doesn't match, I don't pretend it does because I like the person who signed it." Mom said my name sharply. "Cassandra." I turned toward her. "What? You want this privacy again?" She looked away. The board recessed for 30 minutes. When everyone returned, the independent directors announced temporary actions. Ryan was placed on administrative leave pending completion of the investigation. His company purchasing card and system approval permissions were suspended immediately. Mom remained CFO only long enough to support an orderly transition of records, but an interim finance officer would take payment authority. Dad was removed from approval functions and reassigned while the board reviewed his controls failures. Nobody was fired that day. Nobody was declared guilty of a crime. The process mattered. But the hierarchy my family had treated as permanent had vanished. Ryan stared at me as though I had personally taken his chair. "Happy?" he asked. I thought about that. No. And I meant it. But I'm done being required to protect you from consequences. Would you call that revenge? Or would you call it the bill finally arriving? The next 3 weeks were uglier than the meeting because losing control made my family desperate. Mom called relatives before I could explain anything and said Grandma had put an inexperienced granddaughter in charge during a period of grief. Ryan told 2 longtime salespeople that I was trying to dismantle the company and cash out. An uncle called me to say, "Whatever happened, you don't embarrass your brother publicly." I asked him which part had been public. He couldn't answer. The governance meeting had been confidential. Ryan was the one spreading it. Then screenshots from an old family group chat reached me. In them, Mom had written 2 years earlier that Grandma was getting paranoid about expenses, and that I was feeding her suspicions because Cass loves feeling important. Ryan responded, "Keep spreadsheet Cinderella away from finance." I read that line twice. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it clarified 20 years of my life. They had not simply failed to notice me. Whenever I became useful outside the role they assigned me, they mocked the usefulness until I retreated. Grandma had seen that pattern before I did. I sent the screenshots to Trust Council because one message referenced company records. I did not post them online. I did not send them to relatives. I was not going to become careless simply because they were. Meanwhile, the audit expanded. Investigators substantiated $91,800 in payments that had directly benefited Ryan or entities he controlled without appropriate disclosure. Another portion remained disputed. The board also documented $46,000 in expenditures Mom had authorized outside company policy, though the review concluded those funds did not flow to her personally. Her problem was different: concealment, override of internal controls, and failure to disclose a related party concern after she had reason to know about it. Dad's conduct was classified as serious governance negligence rather than personal enrichment. Grandma's estate plan treated those distinctions differently. Ryan's inheritance distribution would be reduced by the amount he was required to reimburse unless repayment occurred first. Mom's unrestricted inheritance depended on completing a formal settlement of the company's governance claims and relinquishing executive authority. Dad could receive most of his share after signing corrective findings and permanently surrendering financial approval authority at Turner Exhibition Works. Cassandra's trust authority would remain through the full 12-month oversight period, regardless of whether the others settled. When Ethan explained that, Mom finally understood Grandma's design. She hadn't tried to make me rich at their expense. She had made me impossible to remove while the records were examined. That distinction destroyed their favorite argument that I was doing this for money. Ryan refused the first settlement proposal. Instead, his attorney threatened to contest the trust on grounds of undue influence. I almost admired the audacity. I had not even known the trust existed until the will reading. The competency evaluations and Grandma's months of documented correspondence made the claim weak, but litigation could still drain time and money. Mom visited me again. This time, Dad came with her. She didn't bring an agreement. She brought anger. "End this," she said. "Tell the board you're satisfied. I'm not the auditor. You control the trust. I control voting rights. I don't get to rewrite transactions." Dad said quietly, "Cass, the company is losing clients." "Is it?" He looked at Mom. She answered, "2 accounts delayed renewals." I had already seen the board report. One had delayed for unrelated procurement reasons. The second asked for assurance of management stability but had not canceled. "That's not the same as losing them." Mom stared at me. "Do you enjoy correcting me?" "I enjoy facts staying facts." Dad rubbed his forehead. Then he surprised me. "Diane, she's right." Mom turned on him. "Don't." "No," he said. "I should have said that years ago." The room went still. Dad looked at me. "I didn't take the money, but I signed things I didn't review. I let your mother use my access, and every time you were dismissed, I told myself staying quiet kept the family together." He swallowed. "It didn't. It just meant I wasn't the one being targeted." Mom said, "So now I'm the villain?" Dad shook his head. "This is exactly what you do. You make accountability sound like an attack." I had never heard him speak to her that way. It did not erase anything, but it mattered because consequences were finally spreading beyond money. Mom had built authority partly on the certainty that Dad would always support her. Now, even that certainty was gone. She left alone. 2 days later, Dad signed the corrective findings. He resigned as controller and accepted a reduced advisory role for 6 months before retirement. Mom negotiated separately. She agreed to resign as CFO, cooperate with the remaining audit, waive claims against the trust, and accept the estate restrictions. Her settlement did not brand her a thief, because the evidence did not show personal enrichment. It documented what the evidence did show. She had protected Ryan, overridden controls, and interfered with scrutiny. Ryan still refused. Then Northline's owner agreed to cooperate with the company in exchange for resolving civil claims. Suddenly, Ryan's position changed. Within 48 hours, his attorney asked to reopen settlement discussions. People call revenge satisfying because they imagine the perfect speech that makes an arrogant person collapse. Mine was quieter. I never delivered one. I simply stopped rescuing him from documents carrying his own name. Ryan's final settlement was signed almost 4 months after Grandma died. He repaid $91,800 to Turner Exhibition Works through a combination of personal funds and a reduction in his estate distribution. He resigned from the company, surrendered any future management claim attached to Grandma's shares, and agreed not to represent himself publicly as speaking for Turner Exhibition Works. The company did not collapse. That was perhaps the most damaging fact to the mythology my family had built around him. Sales continued. 2 account managers absorbed his clients. The independent board hired a new chief financial officer from outside the family. Procurement controls were rebuilt. 6 months later, operating margins actually improved because the company stopped approving poorly documented discretionary spending. Mom hated hearing that. For years, she had insisted the business could function only if certain people were trusted without question. It turned out systems worked better than favorites. She and Dad remained married, but something between them changed permanently. Dad stopped smoothing over every disagreement. Mom withdrew from several community boards where she had enjoyed presenting herself as the flawless steward of Grandma's legacy. Nobody forced her. She simply no longer liked rooms where people might ask why she had left the company. Ryan moved into a sales role with another manufacturer in a different city. We did not reconcile. He sent me one message after his settlement. Hope it was worth destroying the family. I stared at it for a long time before replying. I didn't create the invoices, Ryan. He never answered. I did not inherit Grandma's CEO chair because she had never intended me to. At the end of the 12-month trust review, I remained voting trustee, but day-to-day management stayed with professionals. I kept my job at the railcar plant. That confused Mom more than anything. She had assumed power was valuable only if I used it to become important. Grandma had understood me better. I didn't want applause. I wanted decisions that could survive inspection. The company eventually created an employee advisory seat on its governance committee, strengthened anonymous reporting procedures, and required independent review of related party vendor contracts. Those changes mattered more to me than having my name on an office door. On the first anniversary of Grandma's death, Ethan gave me one final envelope she had instructed him to hold until the trust completed its initial review. Inside was a single handwritten page. She wrote, "Cassandra, if you are reading this, then they probably called you cruel for refusing to make their choices disappear. Remember something I learned too late. Keeping peace by hiding unfairness does not create peace. It creates permission." I sat with that sentence for a long time. For most of my life, I thought silence made me the good daughter. I thought being useful without demanding recognition made me mature. I thought walking away from every insult made me stronger. Sometimes walking away is strength, but sometimes silence becomes the space where unfair systems grow comfortable. Grandma's final gift was not the voting trust. It was evidence that I had never needed my family's permission to trust what I could clearly see. Money can buy comfort. A title can create status. A polished reputation can persuade a room for years. But none of those things can replace accountability, and none can manufacture genuine respect once the truth is documented. My mother tried to leave me in a hallway because she believed I had no place in family business. 12 months later, she had no executive authority in that business. My brother had no position there at all, and the woman they once called Spreadsheet Cinderella was the person legally responsible for protecting Grandma's controlling vote. I never celebrated their losses. I didn't need to. The real victory was much simpler. Nobody could put me back in the hallway. And if someone spent 20 years treating you like you didn't matter, then suddenly called you family the moment you had something they needed, would you give them another chance? Or would you finally let their choices have consequences?
Thank you for following this fictional story from beginning to end. Everything in this video is created only for entertainment, education, and reflection. We hope it reminds you that a painful truth is still kinder than a comfortable lie. Once you see a situation clearly, you gain the power to stop confusing familiar pain with love.